Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to join you today. We are going to jump right into the teenage brain and look at the character traits that most parents would describe about their teens. And the character traits that you'll see on your slide are things that we as child life specialists know about teenagers. But I really want to delve more deeply into what's happening behind these traits that we see regularly with teenagers. And what really helps me is to start by thinking about what is the end goal for teens and for adolescents, this period of time where teens are. And the end goal, there's really two that help me. One is gaining independence. We know that as child life specialists that the goal is to gain independence from parents and to be successful young adults and adults. But really thinking about that in terms of survival, leaving the house, finding a group, reproducing, and surviving in the world. We are hardwired, or teenagers certainly, their brains are hardwired from a biological and evolutionary perspective to do these things. The other piece that can be really helpful, and it was actually Dr. Dan Siegel and some of his work. If you haven't been exposed to his work, I highly recommend it. We reference his book Brainstorm in the reference section. But he talks about the period of adolescence as really helping our species as human beings survive a changing world. Our world is ever changing, and it is this period of time in adolescence where adolescents naturally rebel against the status quo and bring in innovative ideas and breakthroughs into the world in all areas, technology, science, medicine, and that helps our species of human beings keep up with the changing world. So adolescents are crucial, and it's really not just important, but very exciting that everything that they're going through does all these amazing things. But when we're living with a teenager day to day as a parent, or when we're working with teens, it can be frustrating. And of course, for teenagers themselves, it can be frustrating. So let's talk a little bit about dopamine. Dopamine kind of changed the way I looked at my son, who is now 16, and understanding what's happening with dopamine. So dopamine is a neurochemical. It's produced by nerve cells in the brain, and it's central in creating our drive for reward. What happens in the teen years is that the threshold for releasing dopamine increases. So dopamine is not released nearly as often. But when dopamine is released, it's released at a much greater rate. So things in the teen's life are much less exciting on a day-to-day basis, but when they find something that they're interested in or that's new, the release of dopamine is much greater. So you can understand how that would create this drive to find excitement, and the goal is, of course, to leave the home. Because for most teens, the home is a very comfortable place. They're fed, they're sheltered, they're cared for, and we wouldn't on our own necessarily want to leave that. So dopamine helps with that. That's the whole purpose. And what's helpful for me to think about and what can be helpful for us as child life specialists in advocating with parents and professionals is that teens, they're not just acting bored, they truly are bored. They're not just thrill seeking, but they're truly driven to seek new experiences and novel experiences and find interesting things. Um, so I haven't really touched on all the different character traits on the slide, but that's because we all know those. I'm going to come back to the one about the difficulty in recognizing basic facial expressions. We're going to talk about that in a minute when we're talking about the differences between teen girls and teen boys. The last thing I want to mention is just if you're interested in looking at a model of the brain, I recommend Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain, and I'll come back to this in a minute, but you can search for that, and there are YouTube videos that are available, and it's a really helpful way to teach about the brain to teens themselves. So let's move into the teen girl brain and talk a little bit about what's happening with our teen girls. It so teen girls, the ultimate goal is for them coming from inside them. They need to be liked and they need to be socially connected. And this drive really starts with estrogen and comes from estrogen. And when we think about biologically and from an evolutionary perspective, what's happening is that teen girls growing into women, as they go out into the world, it's much more beneficial for them to be connected with a group for safety, for support, for being able to survive away from their family. And so these things are driving their need to connect. And it's not just a need that, oh, it would be really nice to have a peer group and have friends, but what it can feel like to a teen girl is truly a life or death situation. And we see this when teen girls are having trouble with their social group. So we'll be coming back to that. The estrogen and oxytocin, which are hormones, they really prime girls for seeking emotional relationships, for seeking connectedness. And I want to talk a little bit about oxytocin. Oxytocin, you may think about as the hormone that aids in labor and delivery. It aids in bonding between mother and child, but it's also very important in teen girls. And what was really an eye opener for me is learning about what happens when teen girls, and this applies to women as well as we get older, what happens when we're stressed. When stress comes into a teen girl's life, they produce cortisol, which so do teen boys. Cortisol is what causes us to fight or flight. It puts us into kind of action mode. How am I going to manage this stress? But for teen girls, what also happens is they release oxytocin, which drives them to connect with others. So the stress response is a little bit different than teen boys, and it's different in men and women. When they're able to find that connectedness, that calms the system. So just stress in general, when teen girls are stressed, we often find them needing and wanting to reach out to their peer group to feel that connectedness to calm their system. And this is important as we think about educating parents and how to set appropriate limits with things like social media, phone use. Not that we wouldn't set limits, but just to be aware of what's really happening at that biological level for our teen girls. So relationship stress is heightened. The verbal areas of the brain are larger, which this also contributes to that connectedness. Teen girls are seeking intimacy from other teen girls and that bonding, but also, of course, from teen boys and that desire to find a mate, so to speak, and eventually reproduce. But that's what the point around hormones drive the belief that being sexually desirable is important. That is what a teen girl's brain and body are telling her, that this is important to attract a mate. And that can work against, obviously, some of the things that the goals that the teen girl may have and her family may have for her. The last point I want to make is that teen girls are twice as likely to suffer from depression by about the age of 15. And that's really important for us as professionals to be aware of. And this is, I don't know much about this, but it's apparently due to the mutation of a gene, CREB1, that puts females but not males at a greater risk for depression. So let's move on to teen males, teen boys, and what's going on with them. Teen boys need to be respected and higher in the pecking order than their peers. Testosterone, as I'm sure you're aware, is what drives and primes teen boys, and it really drives them towards kind of territorial behavior. Also drives them towards finding a mate, attracting a mate and finding a mate, and then eventually protecting and caring for a family. Going back to the slide about facial expressions, what's interesting is that for teen boys, they can start to judge facial expressions as more unfriendly than maybe they're meant to be. So a neutral face, in research studies, a teen boy might see a neutral face and might assess that neutral face as being unfriendly. And this goes back to that stress response and survival and fight or flight, where they're primed to quickly determine, is this person a danger or not, and they err on the side of assuming something is more dangerous than it actually is. I want to talk a little bit about brain growth, and it happens from back to front. I don't know that I mentioned that teen girls' brains develop about 2 to 3 years sooner than teen boys. And what that really means is the integration happens, is kind of more complete in teen girls about 2 to 3 years sooner than it is in teen boys. At our office, we've had a lot of problems with internet and internet going in and out. And to me, that's a really great analogy of what integration is all about for our teens, where sometimes it all works really well and they can connect all the dots and they have great problem solving or, thinking about the consequences of their actions. And then at other times, it seems like all of that is lost. They're distracted. And so I find that either internet connection or maybe a cell phone connection as a nice analogy for them to understand themselves. This is true for both teen boys and girls, but like we were talking about for girls there, that prefrontal cortex is fully developed sooner. So with our teen boys, that prefrontal cortex, which ultimately integrates and helps with problem solving, um, isn't always available to them. And that's where we can see some problems with maybe impulsivity, with making decision making. And there's one other thing at play, which is called hyper-rationality, which is basically the brain deciding that the benefits of some action are more, they carry more weight than the risks. And so even though teen boys can look at the risks and the benefits, their brain automatically errs on the side of, well, the benefits are greater. And so some of the decisions and the risk taking that they do can be very scary and obviously can have some very serious consequences. What can be really helpful is for them to understand that about themselves. And we'll talk in a little bit about how to counteract that some. That also affects just that prefrontal cortex, whether it's available or not at any given moment, can affect the limbic system really taking control. So the limbic system versus the frontal lobe. And Dan Siegel's hand model of the brain does a wonderful job of talking about when we flip our lid, and this can happen to all of us, but where that prefrontal cortex really just isn't engaged and we're just responding from a very emotional place. The last thing I want to mention is sleep cycles and how testosterone changes sleep cycles. Estrogen in girls also changes sleep cycles. So for all of our teens, it becomes more difficult to fall asleep until later, and it's their preference would be to sleep later. But in teen boys at about age 14, this is actually more pronounced. So they tend to stay up even an hour later on average than girls and sleep an hour later. So I want to move on and focus on what does all of this mean when we're thinking about teens who are impacted by parental illness. All of these same things are at play, and then we add a parent's serious illness or an accident, a very stressful, disruptive experience that's happening in their home. And so you can see the bullet points there around schoolwork being disrupted, high levels of anxiety, the illness taking center stage, the teen's social life being interrupted, and added responsibilities or caregiving tasks. And I think as child life specialists, all of those things make a lot of sense. And they're really not much different than when we work with teens who themselves have an illness or an injury, other than maybe the responsibilities or caregiving tasks. But those play a role, obviously, if a teenager themselves is ill in terms of caring for themselves. But I want to talk about the push-pull is the way I think about it, where the body and the brain are telling the teen, leave home, move on, start to gain more independence, but their heart, their mind, what's happening with their parent is really pulling them back. It's pulling them back to focusing on their parent, and it's also creating guilt and confusion, a lot of confusion about, I understand that my dad is really ill and I want to be with him, but why is it that when I'm with him, I just want to be away and I want to focus on my friends, and now I feel really selfish. And what's really impacted me as I've learned more about what's going on with the brain and the body for teens is going back to what we know best as child life specialists, and that's educating around what's happening with the body. And when we can educate teens and we can educate parents and educate the professionals who work with teens, it can all really make a lot more sense. And then there can be open discussion between the parent and the teen around what's going on. And teens can absolutely make a conscious decision and can build really strong coping tools around, well, I understand that I have these urges to be away from my parent and with my peers, but I can override those because I'm understanding where those are coming from, and I can make real specific decisions about how I want to approach my parent's illness. Or they can say, it really works best for me to be around my peers, and parents can understand that that is what their teen needs, and they can work together. So I want to give just two quick anecdotes around what this might look like for our teens. A teenager that I was working with, we'll call her Erica, she was already doing some risk-taking, sneaking out, seeking a lot of attention from boys and from her peer group before her mom was diagnosed with a terminal illness. And when we think about what was happening for Erica when she was sneaking out and getting this attention, that was really calming her nervous system. That became a stress relief for her, just in her regular teen experience. And then her mom is diagnosed with a terminal illness, and there's a lot of stress. So much more stress kicks in, and the need to be even more connected. And the coping tool that Erica already had was to sneak out and be around boys and friends. And so that just became more pronounced for her and more extreme. And really what needed to happen and what we were able to work together on is what was happening and what was kind of the reward, so to speak, for her doing the things that she was doing and resetting everything and helping her find new coping tools that really resulted in the same calmness for her, but allowed her to both support her time with her mom and be with her mom and get what she needed. And we're going to talk in a little bit in the presentation about activities and coping tools, so we'll get there. Another example that comes to mind is a boy, Chandler, whose dad was dealing with an ongoing cancer treatment situation. And he originally responded by taking on a lot of extra responsibility at home. And thankfully, in his situation, his parents recognized that this wasn't beneficial, just long term for him. But he wanted to show his competence and his ability to handle the situation. And ultimately, what they were able to work out, he was able to pick up a job that he could feel he could meet that need of feeling really confident about contributing. And it was also allowing him to engage with peers because he ended up working at Chick-fil-A and he had friends that came by regularly, and it allowed him to really meet both needs of helping to provide for his family or take some stress off of his family, and as well as meet his needs for growth and independence and mastery. So let me stop there. There's so much more that we could talk about with the brain, and I hope this has just piqued your interest if you haven't had a lot of exposure and might cause you to really delve into some of the resources that we've provided. So I want to shift now to the opportunity that we took to talk with some of our teens and find out in their own words what adults do that is helpful and then what adults do that isn't helpful. So we're going to jump into, because with all of this we want to individualize it. That's what's most important. And so we're going to jump into watching a short video on what teens say is most helpful to them. So what is something that an adult has done or said that you have found helpful?
They really stepped in. Like they said, okay, your parents are leaving for Houston. My house is open. Why don't you come over and have a sleepover with my daughters, since we're like best friends.
Nice.
And so they've opened their house. They've taken me to like early morning practices, which is a
big help.
Yes, a big help. And they haven't just said everything's gonna be fine. Like they've actually like stepped in and done something. Like took us to the mall, or like took us out to eat, instead of just like giving us a card and saying, if you need anything, call us. They actually came in and did something.
Yeah.
That they found helpful was when they like encourage you to do something. Like when you say like you can't do it, and they encourage me to do it, and, like it gives me more like strength to want to do it.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, gets you kind of motivated.
I think it's helpful when they understand what's going on, but they don't like overreact.
So I think I'm back on. Okay, sorry about that. So I want to just recap what we heard in the video and also add a little bit to it. And I just want to note that you probably noticed that all of those wonderful teens were girls. And when we think back to what happens for girls and their drive to connect, we do find, and I'm sure all of you find, that teen girls as well as moms, tend to be more readily interested in interacting with others, meeting with us and doing group support. We absolutely have teen boys who provide input to these same kinds of questions, but they tend to want to do it a little more one-on-one. Not all of them. Some of them like to be videotaped. So what did our teen girls tell us? That they want help with specific tasks or needs, that they want the adult to initiate the opportunities to connect. They want adults who understand but don't overreact. This next bullet, we didn't hear this, but we did hear it from several of our teens, and so I wanted to include it. Several of our teens said that they really appreciated when adults encouraged expression of feelings, including utilizing prayer or other faith-related outlets. So we might not suggest that as child life specialists, but we can certainly work within the family system to suggest what works best for a family or a particular teen. Our teens are telling us that they want adults to avoid phrases like everything will be fine, and they're telling us that that when an adult expresses their belief in the teen's abilities, that's really helpful. So let's jump into one other video that we have that focuses on what is it that adults do or say that teens find more frustrating than helpful?
What is something that you find more frustrating than helpful that adults might do or say?
When they say to not tell their business or something, like when there's something bothering you and they're like, don't go around and tell people because it's none of their business, and it's
So the adults are saying to you, don't go talking about that because it's not their business, and we need to keep that kind of within our family.
When they say everything's going to be okay, when it's really not, and then when they're like, okay, you can come to me, but it's a little hard to connect with them because they don't know what it's like to have a mom or dad diagnosed or died of cancer. And it's easier to connect with them if they say, okay, why don't we meet sometime? We'll go out for ice cream, and then we can talk, and if you don't want to talk about it, that's fine. It would be better if they actually said, we'll be there for you, or did an action instead of just being, okay, it's going to be okay, we're here, you have my number.
When they overreact, when they're like, oh, I'm so sorry that you lost your mom, that's less helpful.
I really, really dislike so my parents, they're like separated, and when I talk to my dad, he talks like, he says stuff bad about my mom, and then they tell me not to tell her.
So asking you to keep something a secret, or one person saying something negative about another person in your family.
Yes.